What's up, nerds? A ceasefire in Gaza appears as remote as ever as Iran's response to the Israeli attack on their consulate in Damascus continues to loom large. First, we're going to talk about the ceasefire negotiations and what's happened so far, and then we're going to talk about how Benjamin Netanyahu has already set a date to enter into the city of Rafah. Then we're going to talk about the Iranian response to the attack on their consulate from last week. I'm recording this video on April 9th, 2024. Now, first, let's talk about the ceasefire, because negotiations have continued between Israel and Hamas via a set of mediators in the United States, Qatar, and Egypt. The United States has sent the CIA chief Bill Burns to go help spur along these negotiations alongside representatives from Egypt and Qatar. The hopes, of course, are to establish a ceasefire before the end of Ramadan. However, of course, Ramadan ends on April 9th, which is today. So clearly it's not going too well. Now, the details of this deal are unknown as of right now. It's been reported, at least, that the deal included the release of the remaining hostages in groups of 40, which is pretty large. However, that same report included a denial by Hamas saying that they were unable to accommodate releases that large. And that's, of course, led to some broader concern that is implying that many of those hostages have passed away, and that really it's less than 40 hostages that remain alive. Now, for context, there's around 101 hostages that are believed to still be in Hamas captivity right now. So that is a significant number if it's less than 40 that are still alive that have passed away under Hamas captivity. However, of course, it should be stated that their health status is really unknown. So that's just the concern right now that people are having given those reports. It's been about 6 months since the attacks on October 7th, and the remaining hostages have been in Hamas captivity this entire time. One of the key pieces of leverage that Hamas has maintained since the war began was the fact that they had Israeli hostages. If they didn't have those hostages, then there's really no need for Israel to establish a ceasefire, because that's the only thing that Hamas can really provide back for Israel. Right now, if Israel agrees to a ceasefire, that allows Hamas time to, of course, catch its breath, reconsolidate, and be prepared for the next fight. Well, that also gives not only Israel the same benefit, but it also returns Israeli hostages back to Israel. Again, if they've died in Hamas captivity, then there's really no card left for Hamas to play. Now, of course, all of this comes as Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly set a date to enter into the city of Rafah. And we've already spoken about the risks that an operation in Rafah pose, how this could be potentially the most deadly operation in the entire war so far, and how it risks a broader regional conflict, not only with Hezbollah, but also with potentially Egypt. Now, we're not going to go back over all of that information. If you want to watch that, there's another video I'll link you to at the very end of this video. But this whole operation in Rafah has become one of the key differences between the United States and Israel, and where U.S., at least public criticism of Israel, has really started to form. The United States has really not liked to see the way that Israel has gone about this conflict, with the just absolute massive scope of civilian casualties and collateral damage that this war has had. And there's concern that with 1.5 million civilians crammed into the Rafah area, that Israel could basically create a massive humanitarian catastrophe, even worse than what we've seen so far, if they do not properly account for all those dislocated civilians. Now, I say that there's been a bit of a public disagreement between the United States and Israel. Privately, it's really much of the same. The United States has continued to send weapons and equipment to Israel. So we're kind of seeing a bit of a divide between public and private rhetoric within the United States, and really what that says for aid to Israel. I've seen some calls for aid to Israel to be conditioned, basically meaning that, if Israel goes to, Rafah and launches that operation, then the U.S. should cut off the tap. I've also seen some criticism that the U.S. should cut off the tap for Israel if civilian casualties continue to mount, and they continue to basically, fail to provide, the basic necessities, and provide humanitarian aid for civilians. And of course, with concern over an operation in Rafah, that this could be the deadliest operation in the war, this is really that friction point where we're probably going to see, some of that manifest itself. And we're going to see if Israel is really starting to care more about taking care of civilians. Mind you, they have a responsibility to protect civilians in war. That's just how war works. If you're the military, you protect civilians. You don't go after, you're not going to tolerate civilian casualties or unnecessary collateral damage. And not only is that just the right thing to do and the legal thing to do, it also prevents future war by, you're trying to mitigate the impact to younger generations, so that way they don't become radicalized. Now, because of the way that this war has gone on, there's a huge threat that younger generations in Gaza and in the West Bank and really all across the Middle East are seeing what's going on, and they're going to become more, amenable to some of the talking points that more extreme groups have, especially anti-Israel rhetoric. Now, all of this is going on, but we haven't even hit on Iran yet, and they're very much in this picture. They've condemned Israel over the attack in Damascus, but they have not yet responded. They've threatened to respond, but we just have not seen a response just yet. They've reportedly conditioned their response based on whether or not Israel can agree to a ceasefire in Gaza. I think that's likely a play to show that they tried, to diffuse the situation, just because a ceasefire is not really likely. It may not have really ever been likely, and Iran probably read that and said, okay, well, look, we tried to take the higher ground, but Israel continues their war, so we have to respond. Really more of an information play than anything more tangible or real. There's been varying reports that an Iranian response could come from Iranian territory, or it could come from its proxy network. Also, varying reports that this could include attacks on U.S. troops in Iraq and Syria, and that it could be limited in scope, or that it could be a larger kind of attack. There's really a lot of unknowns about what Iran's response is going to be, and I think that honestly, that speculation and that lack of knowledge around what the response is going to be, that benefits Iran, because again, it's something that it's an ambiguity that might make people feel concerned or nervous, and that gives Iran flexibility to kind of say things in the open, like we won't attack if you do this or that. If you establish a ceasefire in Gaza, for instance. Again, Israel might not listen to that at all. They might not be that concerned with an Iranian response, even if it is significant. Israel knows that they have U.S. backing. Iran knows that Israel has U.S. backing, and that kind of takes us into what the response could be. Of course, Iran wants to prevent a direct war with Israel. Israel is not suited right now for a war with Iran. And I say suited. They're not in a position to fight a war with Iran right now. They've got multiple other fish to fry. They're still fighting in Gaza. A Rafah operation would certainly, require some portion of their military to complete. There's still the security, consideration on how they're going to handle Gaza once this conflict is over. There's still Hezbollah, which we've said in the past could be considered a near peer to Israel, so that requires a significant amount of their military to handle. There's other groups in the area. There's a potential Egyptian posture around Rafah. There's just a lot going on. And so going to war with Iran is the last thing that Israel wants. Well, at the same time, Iran is not suited for, they're not in a position for a war with Israel. Again, remember, Israel has U.S. backing, and Iran, they're not in good shape right now. They've got, a significant economic issue right now. Their currency is starting to devalue. They've got long-standing internal unrest that's gone on for a couple years now. They've got other kinds of, security issues in their southeast with terrorist groups out of Pakistan and Afghanistan. They've got things that they've got themselves other fish to fry. So neither side really wants a war, and they're not really in a position for a war. It really, to me, becomes a question of whether they end up in a war anyway, just because that's where the momentum's going. And neither side can really stop it, because they're kind of trapped in this, response feedback loop where, Iran set up this massive proxy network. They continue to support the proxy network. And even if they don't want to go to war, that proxy network might actually be the thing that sucks them into war anyway. And Israel sees that proxy network. They see the Iranian support for the proxy network. And instead of just targeting the proxies, which they are, they're also targeting, the Iranian, like the IRGC leadership, which is what we saw in Damascus, in an attempt to basically suffocate those groups. So, and that, again, takes us back into that feedback loop where neither neither side wants a war, but they're clashing over this proxy network that could cause a larger war, and that's probably what could, suck them into a fight that they didn't want anyway. Now, there is an incentive for Iran to respond to these strikes in a very, strong way, to appear strong as a government and as a military to their domestic audiences. Like I've said before, they've had, they have some other security issues. They have internal unrest that has kind of lasted for a couple years. They need to show signs of strength to their people to prevent, larger unrest or concern that, their government just isn't up to the task. They also have, however, an incentive to mute their responses and to not have as large of a response against Israel for strategic considerations. Again, the United States is right there. They're not that far, at least military. There's assets there. Israel is certainly capable on their own. And should Israel, wrap up things with Hezbollah, wrap up things with Hamas, Iran's probably next on the list. And so they want to stay off of that list. It had been reported that an Iranian response was going to happen before the end of Ramadan. Of course, we've already said that Ramadan ends today, I believe. So with a ceasefire unlikely and Ramadan coming to an end, we're still waiting for an Iranian response. So we're going to have to just honestly wait and see and continue to assess the situation and see what the response is. I think the type of Iranian response that we see will be very telling. I think the timing of the Rafah operation will be very telling. And there's just a lot of moving pieces here that still kind of need to move in some way. We've been analyzing this for a little bit. Of course, the Iranian-Israel, issue over Damascus a little bit more recently, but a lot to happen that we will be following along with. So subscribe to this channel if you want to follow along with us. We track other conflicts as well and other kinds of international relations issues. So subscribe for analysis on those topics as well. Like this video if you found it helpful or informative, and we will talk next time. Later.